Okay, I think we will go ahead and get started. Welcome back from the break. We are in the session on language, writing, and interaction, and I discovered in the last session that I'm too old to read in the dark this small print, so I'm going to read it off the slide. We have here Simon Buckingham Shum, who's going to also introduce the other two speakers who will speak in this talk, reflecting on reflective writing analytics, assessment challenges, and iterative evaluation of a prototype tool.
Great, thanks very much, Carolyn. So thanks for coming to the session today. We're going to be talking about a kind of writing which is becoming increasingly important, but also difficult to assess, and it's reflective writing. We're going to explain why it's different. I've got two of my co-authors here with me as well, Agnes from Xerox and Mindy from Georgetown University. And just to explain the way in which we've come together, we've obviously got a hybrid academic commercial partnership here, which may be an interesting feature for you. We have not present here Rosalie from UTS, but Rosalie and Randy and Mindy are the sources of our reflective writing corpus, and they were also doing the coding of the corpus, and Rosalie's an expert in reflective writing. At the Connected Intelligence Center, I and Sean were playing the role of sort of learning analytics researchers. Obviously, Sean is a web developer. We're doing the user requirements, the user interface evaluation, and designing the overall evaluation of the prototype. And then we have Agnes from Xerox's research center in Grenoble, who was we're using the Xerox NLP natural language processing platform. And we will be contributing to this talk in our respective capacities. Okay, well, what's the driver for this? Why are we interested in reflection? Well, the answer is because we need to create graduates who have a whole bunch of skills that perhaps were less important in the past, but are certainly important now. So we're talking about the ability to integrate not just theory and academic concepts and skills, but understand how that relates to practice. We're talking about authentic performance. We're trying to shift our assessment practices to be increasingly authentic. Real world, complex, overloading the user, too much information, complex politics, interpersonal relationships. We're trying to put them in real situations where we may not necessarily be able to study them in a sort of detailed lab analytics way. We're trying to instill from day one a professional disposition. You're not here to learn about nursing or to be a teacher. You're to learn about teaching or about engineering. You're here to be a nurse. You're here to learn to be what it means to be a teacher in practice. We want our graduates to be what we might call emotionally integrated. So affect is not a bad word. It should not be a bad word. Teaching and learning is an emotional experience. Students go through the whole gamut of emotions. We want them to be able to integrate that into their reflection and how they think about their learning. Well, here's a bit of a deep one, but we actually, you may go to university to get a sense of calling. You're trying to figure out who you are and where your passion is. So where do you get to do that? And do we care about learning with other students or having those kinds of transformational experiences? And, well, here's another big one as well. I mean, ideally, you're leaving university seeing the world differently, holding your assumptions much more loosely than you might have, understanding that your way of seeing the world isn't the only way any longer. So, reflection is a crucial process for integrating these very high order competencies and qualities and dispositions. And how do we know what's going on in the student's mind if we actually value this? Well, reflective writing is a window onto the student's mind. But it's only a window onto the student's mind if they know how to write in order to better reflect. The act of writing helps you figure out what you think. And moreover, only if they know how to make their thinking visible using language. Right? Otherwise, no one else will know what's going on. And this isn't just so they can get a good grade. This is so that as a nurse or a midwife or an engineer, you can maintain your professional accreditation because you're demonstrating deep reflection on your practice. So what do we mean by reflective writing? Okay, well, here's an example from nursing. Okay, so here's to structure this essay, I'll use the framework described by Gibbs. Well, that's not very reflective, but it's a good academic move. Whilst the episode concerned relates a stage in Miss Drew's illness when she challenged her dum-de-dum-de-dum-dum, right, we're talking about Mrs. Drew and her particular history around pain and how she copes with pain. In particular, it prompted me to question to what extent I, as a nurse, should recommend analgesia, drawing on what I'd been taught about the effective control of pain. I had learned it was better to control rather than chase pain. So now we have academic ideas and teaching and what I learned in class coming into collision with the real world experience. And here's a preview of where we're heading in this presentation, that there are some particular phrases here which we're very interested in. Right? The links on these slides will all be up afterwards, so don't worry if you don't catch them. This is the academic writing analytics tool using the reflective parser that we're talking about today. Okay. Here's another example. I'm not going to read it all out, but it's from a teacher. It's one thing to learn stuff in the classroom, it's quite another to be standing in front of a class of teenagers. Right? And that experience can be quite traumatic. It can also be very inspiring. Okay? But this teacher's showing that he realized quite quickly that his written text materials weren't really cutting it. And that's a pause for thought. And we want to know that teachers are able to recognize that. And there, again, is a little preview of what the tool is feeding back to the student. Now, so this is a very different kind of writing from the kind that we normally ask our students to perform when we set them an essay in a particular prompt. What's the difference? Okay, it's not about demonstrating my mastery of what I know. I actually am being encouraged to share perhaps what I don't know. I'm being encouraged to share that I may be experiencing internal conflict or uncertainty, that my understanding is changing over time, so it's not just a snapshot of what I know by the time of the submission deadline. This is me with a much longer horizon, looking into the back, into the past, and possibly looking into what I'm going to do in the future, talking about my experience, including my emotional reactions to this, okay, and my professional disposition and how that's developing. Okay, now the starting point when we think about grading texts is often rubrics. Okay, and when you look at the scholarship into reflective writing, rubrics talk about referring to the past. We want to see a reference to the past where a particular incident occurred. What's the context? Give me some specifics about this. Don't be vague. And what kinds of changes are going on. And Now the problem is this is challenging to teach for many educators and also challenging to assess. There are different definitions of what reflective writing looks like, and how you grade it is quite a challenge as well. So our sort of starting point is to take the rubrics that the instructional designers and scholars of reflective writing have developed and say, okay, how do we move from that into formal patterns in an NLP platform that could be recognized? I'm going to hand over to Agnes from Xerox now, who's going to walk you through the process.
Yeah, so I would like to give you an example of how we go from one particular rubric to a formal pattern that we implement and how we implement it into the NLP tool. So here you see the academics rubric. So this is what I got. It's verbs that show awareness or shift in perception. These are also instructions to students how to write reflective, what kinds of things, what kinds of linguistic resources to use while writing a reflective essay. And if they want to express a shift in perception, they should say things like, I began to understand, I could see, I could visualize. So these kinds of expressions are good for humans to know what kinds of sentences they should write. And if you look at this list, it is quite limited and finite. So, okay, we call this label shift in perception. So we are going to find sentences that describe shift in perception. But we are not only going to look for these specific expressions because it would be not enough. For example, if you look at this sentence, I'm grateful for the practical component, etc. I achieved greater knowledge. I achieved knowledge. So here, clearly, there is a shift in the perception, but there is none of these expressions, and even the perception part is not conveyed by a verb. It's a noun, but it wouldn't be a problem for a human being to say that this is shift in perception. Then, if you look at this sentence, where this shift is conveyed by allows me to understand, the same, you have understand, but you have allow, and you don't have this in the list, but again, you have no problem of knowing that it is, again, a shift in perception. And finally, a last one, I can already see that my attitude has changed. Again, the perception word is not a verb, but it is attitude, and it has changed. So the question is, how can we grab these expressions and label them as change of perception? Because if you look at them, they all use very different vocabulary, completely different structures, and you understand that they describe the same as the rubric, but they are completely different still. So what the way we make our model is not built on lexical and grammatical patterns, because it would be not enough. It won't go. It wouldn't cover all this, but it is a conceptual pattern. If you look at these three sentences, they all convey three kinds of concepts. One, so this is the rhetorical pattern. They all include something about the author, but the author can be referred to either as I or me or my. Okay, it doesn't matter here because it refers to the person. They are very different grammatically. Then you have a component that is a mental, construct a mental operation or something related to mental, which is in this case knowledge and understand and attitude. They all belong to this semantic space of mental operation or mental category. And you have a third component, which is change. So the way we model this rhetorical pattern of shift in perception, it is a change in some mental operation of the author, right? So these are three concepts. We are going to look for these three concepts in the text, but this is not enough because you might find these three concepts instantiated by some word in a sentence, but still it doesn't mean shift in perception, because this author mental change, it is a coherent concept. So you need the syntactic dependencies in the sentence. So the way these are found are that these concepts are syntactically related with each other with a sentence. Syntactic dependency, so for example, I achieved, I is the subject, achieved is the verb, and achieved knowledge, it's an object. But these syntactic relationships are different. They are not important. The importance is their presence. So this is the basis of this kind of modeling, that for each rubric and each kind of concept that we want to detect, we model it in terms of concepts, and we have lists of words that can instantiate the concepts, and we can find them through their syntax, if they are syntactically related in the sentences. So the way it is implemented in the Xerox incremental parser, which the basic function of which is syntactic analysis. So you see one of the sentences that you saw in the previous slide. They have a number of syntactic dependencies, or among between the two word pairs, or I can see, my attitude towards the university. They are all syntactic dependencies among these words. And so this is the basis. On this, we have lexical databases of words that instantiate we call them constituent concepts of the concepts that constitute each rubric, like my, all the words that refer to the author, which is very, very easy because it is I, my, and me. But for the other classes, it's not that easy. But we do have lists of words. And finally, we have co-occurrence rules, which can select those sentences where exactly these words are in syntactic relationships. So this is the way that we model the rubrics. So at this moment, this analysis is related to sentences only. So we analyze sentences, we can find sentences, but we know that reflection and shift in perception, it is not necessarily described in one sentence. It can span over several sentences or in paragraphs, and now we are working on extending this so that shifts or the other rubrics can be labeled or detected in longer sections and sentences. So thank you. So now Simon will continue with the student contexts.
Okay, so briefly, the two contexts. The parser was actually developed in the context of UTS engineering practice. The students are on 2 different placements over 6 months, so it's a very serious set of placements. It's a formal graded report they have to produce. They are large reports. Basically impossible to provide feedback, rapid formative feedback on drafts, right? This is where we're trying to get to. We're not really pushing on automated grading here. We're talking about rapid formative feedback on your draft writing so that when you actually do submit, it's a high quality product. So there's a lot of potential here for writing analytics, especially as they're looking to produce finer grained, more precise assessment of reflective writing. And there's a link there to find out more about the details of the course. Mindy will just introduce a very different context now, which is Georgetown University.
Thank you, Simon. Hello, everyone. I come from Georgetown University, which many of you might know is in Washington, D.C. in the United States. And Georgetown is the oldest Catholic and Jesuit institution of higher education in the U.S. We have about 7,000 undergraduates and 6,000 graduate students. And it's the context of our Catholic and Jesuit identity and the mission that has influenced the kinds of things we talk about in education and educational practice that I sort of want to make the link for you here. I work at the Teaching Center. I'm the Associate Director for Assessment at our Teaching Center at Georgetown. So we work with a lot of different faculty across a lot of different disciplines. And within that context, we try to bring in the concept of reflection a lot of the time because it's very core to the Jesuit and Ignatian pedagogy practice. It's the sort of key piece of 5 pieces of Ignatian pedagogy. So one of the things that we have done is to think about reflection as the moment when all of the information is sort of being processed by the student. You're taking the disciplinary or the content, the experience, but it's their moment of making it personal and making it meaningful, making sense out of it. We have one project that is called our Engelhardt Project for Connecting Life and Learning. It's been going on for about 10 years. And in this project, from the beginning, we've been collecting a reflective essay from students at the end of the semester. So we have stacks of paper in my office and in a few other colleagues' offices with these. First 10 years ago, students were writing them by hand. Now we're collecting them online. And we have a large corpus of these, but we didn't have a good way, besides the faculty member looking at them and making use of it to understand his or her own students from that course. We didn't have a way of thinking about them across the project. We would take samples of them and look at them in small batches, but working with Simon, we were able to think about a way to look at a lot of essays at once. So we developed a corpus that was about 350 student essays for this project. Our reflective writing prompt was fairly simple. This is what they responded to at the end of the semester. Georgetown has a commitment to educating the whole person. Some students find this course has affected them as a person. Others find it has not. Tell us about your experience. So we got responses to this. An example response I think I'll skip over now, but just to give you the sense that it was about personal experiences for the student relating to the course content. So I'll turn it back over to Simon for the moment.
Great, thanks. Okay, so a lot of the detail of the evaluation is in the paper, of course. Our goal is to give you a sense of how we are working with colleagues to evaluate this. Right. So one way of evaluating this kind of work, of course, is to say, well, how good is the machine in comparison to the human? And we would ask, we've got a corpus of texts. On the left, they're annotated by the human. On the right, they're the sentences identified by the machine, and we're doing a mapping. And essentially, you then create a confusion matrix, which says how many times did the machine think something was interesting that the human also thought was. On the other hand, how many times did the machine overreact, so to speak, because the human thought it was not so interesting. And from that, we can start to generate different kinds of metrics. So this will be familiar to some of you as a metric of how precise was it, how accurate was the parser, etc. And after a first evaluation, we were quite encouraged, but it's by no means perfect. We then went through an iteration, expanded the lexicon, disambiguated some words, introduced some new sentence categories that were clearly important to people, and improved things a little bit further. Then we received a much larger corpus from GU, which of course increased significantly the danger that Zip wasn't going to recognize important words, but precision didn't really change too badly. Other things did degrade. So again, this is as good as we've got so far. It's a work in progress. But we're encouraged, especially as the parser was developed for engineering and then applied to a whole range of different disciplines at GU. Clearly, there are some core things in reflection which are translatable. But exactly what was going on here? Why have we got so many false negatives and positives? And so Mindy's going to just talk a little bit about one little example of that, very quickly.
We found a number of things we identified as patterns. One was very simple, and we were able to fix after our prototype evaluation into our second time with the larger corpus, which was there were missing words from our reflective lexicon. So when we saw that, we could put those into what the parser knew as its dictionary, and that was easily solvable. That was fun, solve something. This is one example of that. But let me move forward to another one, which I think is a little bit more interesting. We found that the parser told us things we were doing we didn't know we were doing. So I was one of the coders at Georgetown with a few graduate students of mine, and we coded for things that we said were reflection, and the parser said, this is not reflection. And we said, well, but it is, it's the meaning, it's the action, it's the result of the reflection. But the parser was finding things that at a sentence level were only, this is a reflective construct. And so it was interesting to see that, and we've made a commitment to perhaps work together to work that kind of thing into the parser, either by it recognizing what comes after a reflective identification, or perhaps to identify actions and then see the relative interaction or the relative location, perhaps, of reflective statements and action that someone says, I will now do this, I expect to, I am changing my behavior in this way. So we also had, those were the false negatives, we had some false positives where we made some realizations about what was going on. At the top box represents the extent of one reflection I got from a student. So while I expected something that was maybe more like half a page or a page, it was 2 sentences. In my mind, that was not a reflection. So I coded it as not really having reflection, didn't have meaning for me. Now the parser found it as being reflection, which is the green highlighted, And that's exactly true. It does have these features. So we need to build in some of the human considerations that we didn't know were our considerations, such as text length counts. If it's only 2 sentences, can it be reflective in a meaningful way? And the lack of detail or explanation, which the human recognizes as, you just basically scratched the surface. That was a surface level reflection, doesn't mean anything to me, needs to be also built in. So we're planning to work that in that direction.
Okay, so just to wrap up then, the future work here is trying to make the reporting back more actionable. So not just showing highlighting, but actually helping the student figure out how to improve their writing next. The student wants to know whether they've got highlighting that seems to be good highlighting. So there are a range of analytic techniques we're looking to develop to try and establish whether there are highlighting patterns that correspond to distinction versus a fail, for example. We're developing, thinking about what it means for a system like this to be accountable. So we've shown you 2 ways of evaluating its quality, but there are many other ways as well. And in the future, and in the paper, we talk about how we feel that the participatory design process we used did forge the right kind of trust relationships between the stakeholders. But this is a theme that we're now developing under the heading of sort of algorithmic accountability. Okay, so we should stop there. Thank you for your patience, and we'll have to take maybe 1 or 2 questions at this time.
Okay, I just want to very selfishly make the first comment and say I think that's beautiful work. And I just have to say it's the kind of approach that kind of went by the wayside when machine learning started to become big. And it used to be like 15 years ago the way people did it, and they threw it away because at that time parsers that could do a good syntactic analysis were very slow. Unfortunately, they were replaced by these statistical parsers that don't do any kind of deep syntax. So I imagine that it's a problem when you get into passivization and relative clauses where the surface relations are different. But still, I'm extremely happy. I think this is exactly the right approach. That I just wanted to say that. Okay, questions? Yes.
First, thank you for the great presentation, and I really appreciate the error analysis part. That's oftentimes actually missing in quite some papers. So I have a question about the reflective lexicon. So you mentioned that the training data is limited, and there's a lot of different kinds of variations in the way people express that. So do you have any future plans on like how do you expand it or include in your future work?
You mean the extension of the lexicon?
Yes.
Well, I think now we do have, because there are not, it is quite a limited set of vocabulary that we need here. It is just stylistically, because the vocabulary that we took in for this parser, it came from a previous parser for some other, which analyzed scientific articles, so they didn't have some words, because in a scholarly article you don't say I realize, so this is why the word wasn't in it. And just we add words as they come from the corpus, the verbs, and this is the way we don't have a special technique to add the words.
Yep, and so the way that we work with academics in the faculties is to tune the parser if it needs tuning when we start to realize it's missing important things. So there's a core, but then, reflection in archaeology or history of art might look a bit different from reflection in physics or engineering. So there are, we showed some examples of how the iteration needed to expand the lexicon, do a bit more precise disambiguation, invent some new categories of sentences.
Okay, next question, and I'd like to invite the next speaker up to set up his computer.
Thank you very much. This is really amazing, and I appreciate a lot the fact that you went beyond the knowledge poor algorithms kind of design from the NLP side. I'm just curious to know about the rhetorical structures or the discourse theories that you are using.
I don't use any special theory. It is the rhetorical structures that come up from the rubrics here. So it is the theory, it is, I don't know, I'm not a theoretician of this part. It is the writing instructors who have their rubrics, which comes through their practice, I think, and also probably through some theoretical work that is behind it, which comes, and my work is to model this, their practice.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, I agree with the other speakers that this lightweight approach is kind of quite promising, and I would like you to comment. Your precision recall numbers are not particularly, high, which is not a surprise to anybody who's attempted this kind of domain. I just wonder what will be acceptable numbers, and which one would you give more priority, precision or recall?
Well, this is an interesting question, because this is really, it's really tough for humans to agree on some of this, right? So the machines are struggling in one sense. As I say, we're not trying to grade here. We're trying to provoke reflection on what it means to be reflective. So we are giving a vocabulary to the students, which for the first time in many senses. We're also encouraging the students to disagree and push back against the machine, right? So with respect to this morning's keynote, the fact that the machine is imperfect, we think may actually be a feature. Now that may sound a bit bizarre, but we want the students to disagree with the machine and talk about what the machine is giving them as well. And if they feel that they really were being deeply reflective and the machine said, no, you weren't, well, that's okay. They're not being graded. It's about provoking reflection and teaching them how to write, to learn, and learn to write.
Sorry, can I add just one thought? It is that this evaluation or test was done in a completely different corpus. So I never saw this. I never knew about it. And I got some kind of corpus with the rubrics. And what was amazing that it still worked on it to not to that extent, meaning that the essence of this rhetorical move of reflection, it was the same about for both.
It appears we have time for one more question.
I guess I'd worry about saying that it worked with an F score of 0.23, I think it was. And so as you move forward, I would wonder the degree to which there's a trade-off between getting them to push back and frustration and what an increased accuracy might do. So by taking potentially a different approach where you pick up things from language through semantics, rather than using parsers, we have all sorts of tools that we can pick up sentiment and verbs related to the kinds of things that you're looking at, even the presence or absence of pronouns, but taking that collectively, which is what the humans are doing. They're taking all sorts of features from the words and from there are all sorts of signatures from the language that can be missed if you just take what I'm thinking of as a slightly limited approach. And so what I would want to see is something where you contrast it with a different approach, for example, without the syntactic parsing, and then look at the accuracy then where you're comparing different types of systems. And then, but then also I worry about the reaction of the students and whether having a more accurate system would also help them, even if you did allow them to push back.
Yeah, I was being a little provocative there, but the next phase that we're in now is adding additional parsers in, looking at whether we can improve that by using different approaches. Andrew Gibson, who's sitting just a few rows in front of you, will be working on this, and over the course of this year, we'll be examining whether additional techniques can enrich that. So the tool will be sitting on a multitude of different language services. That's the sort of trajectory that we have for this.
Okay, so we can continue this discussion during the break, and now